I mean, Jesus was he was a trailblazer when he walked this earth. And the way that he taught is just as trailblazing today as it was then, when we begin to understand what it actually means. The problem with us today in this day and age is that culture is just so alluring, right? It calls us to just jump in along, that the ride will somehow be easier for us, or there'll be much less friction to just go along with what's happening. And to resist the movement of today's culture is to cause some bumps in the road of our lives. It may rub some people the wrong way. But to live the way of Jesus is to defy those cultural norms that continue to want us to just go along with the grain, making life smoother because it just makes everyone around us less uncomfortable. But to live a life of Jesus is to love people as Jesus loved us first. Not how the world around us classifies what love is. That the action of our behavior is one that reveals an unconditional and sacrificial nature that goes beyond mere feelings. It's a love that moves against the current of society. And that brings us to this morning on this journey to live a life that goes against the grain of modern society. So let me ask this morning, how many of you would classify yourselves as great shoppers? Right? You love to hit the stores. Oh, Debbie is? Okay. Amazon, right? You're an impulse buyer when you see something on the shelf or on your news feed, right? That's my problem, right? I see when I'm walking through the bakery section of the grocery store, right? Or, a new tool shows up on my news feed and says, oh, yeah, I really need that new tool. Some of us are just great shoppers, right? We get excited when the letter comes in the mail saying our credit card limit has increased, right? But maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't classify as a great shopper. How many of you are great bargain hunters? You get excited because you believed you saved money on the thing that you didn't need to buy because it was 50% off and you got a really good deal, right? Or you drive around on Saturdays looking for all the yard sales. You search Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, other platforms looking for that great deal that you can jump on when it shows up. Okay, but maybe neither of those fit. How many of you would classify yourselves as great savers? You've done all the things you were supposed to do through this life. If you follow Dave Ramsey, you've got your envelope set up for one thing or another, right? Your pension is set, your emergency fund is set. You know just how to save for a rainy day. But what if we weren't called to any of those things in life of following Jesus? You see, the culture we live in tells us we either need to save or we need to spend, right? To take care of our future or to enjoy the pleasures of today. It's why catalog after catalog shows up to our houses. And if you're part of a mailing list, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get them in the mail, and there's 6 different catalogs from different companies telling you what's new and what you need to buy. And let's not even talk about what happens around Thanksgiving, right? Because we get everything for Black Friday. And it's this mad rush to find the deal or the new tech or the shiniest model of whatever it is. We've become a society and culture that is consumed by our consumption. Just look at how fast we can get things now. Right? If you're under the age of 40, you're not going to get this reference at all, but later ask your parents or ask your grandparents. But when I was growing up, there was this thing called layaway, okay? I could decide today that I needed to buy something, and it was essential for me to put it on hold, then go back to the store and pay it down until I could take it home. But I needed to have it 6 months from now, okay? And I knew when I needed it. Today, those things are just a click away. And we can have them within a few hours, right? It becomes this hamster wheel of spending. I make money so I can spend money. I make money so I can spend money. We have become a society consumed with consumption. See, but the reality for us this morning is that we were called to live a different way. That if we call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ, then there is a different way to live, one that breaks the cycle of the wheel. And we can jump off and work against the grain of society. Now, when Paul wrote his young apprentice Timothy, right? Paul wrote several warnings around the use of money and the pitfalls to watch out for. See, consumerism is not a new concept. Consumerism has been around for centuries. And the allure of getting rich has traveled through time. In his first letter to Timothy, Paul writes this: "For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." So whether you're a great shopper, or you're a great bargain hunter, or a great saver, Paul gives us a strong picture here that the greatest trap to society is money. It calls to us. See, money makes us feel safe and secure. It makes us feel like we have some sway over an organization. Scholar and theologian Thomas Oden once said that we expose ourselves to self-deception when we long for the seemingly careless security that we imagine riches can bring. We deceive ourselves when we begin to believe that there is security in the money we are gaining, spending, or saving. See, because culture is trying to pull us into the trap of consumerism and self-preservation. Paul's warning here is to watch out for this deception because there is real dangers of materialism. Materialism is something that can grab our attention. The promise of material gain is all around us, right? The sweepstakes win. How many of you wanted Ed McMahon to show up at your house one day, right? You got your letter in the mail, and here he comes, right? I got 15 emails this morning telling me I could hit it big, right? That's why we buy the scratch-offs, hoping we could win it. Or we just cut the deal of our career. The constant and overwhelming get-rich-quick schemes that are fed to us by mass media. That's why we love The Price is Right, right? The truth is, none of these things could lure us if our hearts weren't already set on accumulating wealth. We want to hit it big. We don't want to have to work or to feel some sense of security because it's this natural bent towards being wealthy that can find ourselves in hot water and lead us into danger. In 1946, one of the biggest inventions of all times came out to change the world of consumers: the credit card. I could buy it now, and I could pay for it later. It was still harder to buy things then because you actually had to physically go to the store or had to wait for that mailing catalog to come to your house. Today, we just take that little piece of plastic, one swipe, one click, it's ours to take home. And I'll just buy it now, and I'll pay for it at a later date. That's a future me's issue. And many of us have multiple of those little credit cards. You swipe here, you tap there, link it to my phone so I can Venmo, Apple Pay, whatever gets the money out of my hands faster. The danger of a material world is that we can get so far ahead of ourselves and ahead of our means at such an amazing rate. In a study done last year, the average debt across the United States, without counting your house, was $29,700. That's the average debt. If you had a mortgage, your debt became $271,500. That's across the United States. Now, here in New Jersey, the average family's debt last year was $111,172. So $111,000 is the average debt across New Jersey. We are seeing the largest expenditures of money that we have ever seen in history without actually having the money on hand. We live on credit. And unfortunately for us, it's easy to fall into a trap of society calling us and pulling away from what God has called us when it comes to a life with money. And the truth is for us this morning is that we brought nothing into this world, as Paul says. But God has provided for us. He's taken care of us all the days of our lives. And when you begin to focus on that understanding, we can then flip the script of money management in our lives. We can begin to live generously in a materialistic world where our lives become a place of contentment versus consumerism. Contentment over consumerism is a difficult practice today. Paul says that if you have food and you have clothes, then you should be content with that. But the world tells us that we need more money, more stuff, more for me and more for my family. Consumerism is all about me and what I can get. Contentment is found in the one who gave it all to you. It's no longer about me. The focus shifts to the provider. That he has given me all that I have, and I'm to use those resources now for the good of the kingdom. That's the heart of living generously. Cultivating a heart of contentment is to understand that all the money I have isn't mine to begin with. That all I have to be blessed with belongs to God first. And I'm just holding on to it for a little while, to oversee this material possession so that I can further the mission and further the kingdom of God. But the reality is that is such a countercultural approach to finances. The secret to a generous living is about how we use the resources that we have today. And unfortunately, there are so many myths out there right now on what it means to actually live generously, to what it means to be generous. And I think most people would believe themselves to be generous, right? I believe most people would think that. Or that they can't be generous right now because of where they are in life and they're waiting for this thing to happen. But to understand what it means to be generous, to live a generous life, then we need to understand the myths that have traveled throughout history. Right? And the first myth is that generosity is spontaneous. It's this belief that I'm a generous person because there was an immediate need and I fulfilled it. And the truth behind that is that that's generally based on some kind of emotion, right? There's some emotional plea, some tug, some tearful thing, right? They stand up at the telethon and say, you really need to help us right now. And you feel tugged in your emotions to give. But an impulse give does not make a person generous. Generosity that lives counterculturally is much deeper than that. True generosity is thought through. We think about it. It's not based on impulsivity. The second myth is that generosity is regulated by cash flow. It's this belief that I can't be generous until I have reached this financial milestone. Then I can begin to live a generous life. When the truth is that we are called to live a generous life right now. No matter what level we might be at today. And the last two myths for me, they kind of go hand in hand. It's this myth that it's the amount is what counts. And that the rich people are generous. Too often we believe that the quantity of my giving or the quantity of my gift equals the amount of generosity in my heart. Or we believe that someone who is rich is just naturally generous because they are so blessed. But those ideas are not mutually exclusive. Plenty of rich people are not generous. And the number of a gift is not a clear indication of generosity. The gospel writer Mark tells a story of Jesus at the temple when people were bringing their gifts into the temple. And in chapter 12, Mark writes this. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put 2 very small copper coins, only worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all of the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Now, watching all that's going on, I'm sure the disciples were confused by Jesus' words. Now, given their status in life and the teachings that they were taught growing up, they believe these last two myths of generosity that many of us believe. That the amount matters and that the rich are naturally generous. I believe the disciples felt that those who were wealthy had made a much more significant contribution because the dollar amount was bigger that they gave, and now more can be done to accomplish for the temple because of that gift that they had given. See, but what the disciples and many of us fail to see and appreciate is the total commitment to God in this widow's small gift. See, the rich gave out of all that they had, a portion and a small amount. This widow gave all she had to live on. the last of her living expenses, trusting that God would take care of the rest. You see, too often we get caught up in consumerism and wealth management that we fail to find contentment with what we have first. Allowing God to show us a life that is guided by His direction. Author Ron Blue published a book called Master Your Money. And in it he says there are 5 things you can do with the money that you have right now. You can spend it, you can repay debts, you could pay taxes, you could save it, and you can give it. And many of us live this way today, in this order. And this little one at the end is what we do with what's left, right? If there's anything left, I can do all the other things now with what's left, I can give it, right? But if we're going to live countercultural, to live a life of generosity, to work against the grain of consumerism, we have to understand the joy of generosity. Living a life of generosity is more than just random acts of giving money away or the change in our pocket. It's more than putting a few dollars in the collection basket. Living generously can be characterized by 3 very specific things. It's premeditated, it's calculated, and it's designated. Living a generous life is intentional. It doesn't come naturally to us. We have to work at it. By nature, we are selfish individuals. And if you don't believe me, take the example from any 2-year-old, okay? Take a 2-year-old and give them a toy. 5 minutes later, take that toy away from them without explanation. And the cries and the wails, and they want their toy back because it was theirs and they want it back now. Selfishness comes naturally to us. By contrast, generosity needs to be intentional. We need to work at it and cultivate it in our lives. The prophet Isaiah said it this way: generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. Unlocking the joy of generosity is to plan for it. It's a premeditated decision in your finances and your lifestyle to be generous. Once you have planned to be generous, we need to now pre-decide how much we are going to give. It's a calculated decision. And now, thanks to tax season, right? Imagine saying that in your lifetime. Thank you, God, for April 15th. I'm so glad it's here. But thanks to tax season, we all know how much we make by the end of the year. We all know it. And by planning what to do as generous, as Isaiah says, we can now calculate how much of that annual income we're going to give. Whether it's a set amount of money or a percentage, but it's a very tangible, pre-decided amount in our hearts and in our minds and in our houses. We've thought about it. We've calculated it. And now once you have that number, whatever that calculated amount is, the next step is to decide where that money should go. We need to designate those funds for a specific purpose. Now let's break that down. It's very easy to get into the weeds here from where I'm standing. But we need to decide ourselves where that's going to give. And if I could give a suggestion or two, there's just 2 basic rules to go by when you think about where to take that premeditated, calculated fund. First is just to think, what are you grateful for? Are you grateful for the local church? Grateful for a place to worship and to do ministry? Then give to there. Are you grateful for where your kids or your grandkids go to church? Glad that they're being fed by the gospel? Then give to them. And write them a note saying, thank you for all that you're doing for my kids and my grandkids. Giving generously can be about saying thank you for all the ways that I am being blessed right now. The second rule of thumb is to give to what breaks or what calls to your heart. Is there an organization or a ministry that reaches your passions? Whether that's serving food to those who are experiencing homelessness or building homes for people in need or rescuing animals or supporting young families. By designated to either of these basic rules, to what you're grateful for and to what calls to your heart, begins to give us freedom from consumerism and the guilt associated by saying no to other giving asks. You see, generous people don't feel guilty for saying no because they've already said yes. They don't feel guilty for saying no to this because they've already said yes to this. They've decided and set aside a predetermined number. Craig Rochelle of Life Church has said that generous people give willingly, proportionally, and sacrificially. And the reality for us is that the life of generosity that is willing and proportional and sacrificial can unlock the joy of generosity to where our gift, our generosity becomes a form of worship. If we were to look at those 5 ways to spend money again, and we take that last one on the list to where it's now the first thing that we take care of, right? We have flipped the script on our money management and to where giving, now rather the predetermined and calculated and designated plan of giving becomes a form of worship back to God. To say, God, you have given me so much. To say, this is all yours, and here is a percentage that I am giving back to you just to say that I recognize your lordship over my finances. And thank you for blessing me with all that I have. Now with what's left, I can begin to save and begin to live. And in truth, it may open us up to say yes somewhere else, or to do the impulsive and the emotional asks because we don't have to stress about how much we're giving, because it's been planned and it's been set aside. We know what's left to work with. To put it in budgeting terminology, we give first, save next, and then we live on the rest. When we plan our generosity, when we give first, we can begin to work against the grain of culture that tells us to consume, consume, consume. The dangers that material presents to us will start to have little effect on our lives. Consumerism begins to take a back seat to contentment. When we give first, we start to feel the joy the generosity can bring into our whole lifestyle. It's then that we can save what is necessary for the future and experience the financial peace we keep looking for. Able to live on what's left because we've planned our lives and our generosity. There's a freedom when we use generosity as a way to worship God for all the good that He has done in our lives. And we sat down and we've planned it. See, living a life of generosity and living generously doesn't happen by accident. Living a generous life in a materialistic world is premeditated. It's calculated and it's designated to go back to the mission of God in the world. To open us up for generosity in the future. To live a life that is actually against the grain.